Unemployment is the third of the major macroeconomic performance goals we're looking at. For those of you that have been working through the videos, we started off with sustainable economic growth, then low and stable inflation, and now low unemployment. Unemployment is a measure of the number of people who are willing, able, and actively seeking work but can't find it. Now, that's a little bit of a mouthful for something that you might think is very simple. And it's not a complicated idea, but we need to be a little bit more precise in economics than we are in everyday speech. So, number of people who are willing to work. We don't want to include people as unemployed who don't want a job, who perhaps are very happy living off their savings or being supported by someone else. Able is important as well. We wouldn't want to count someone who is disabled, for example, and can't work as being unemployed. So willing, able, and actively seeking as well. People need to be actually going out there and looking for a job. Otherwise, we're not wanting to count them in these figures. For example, full-time students won't count because they're in full-time education. They're not looking for a job. Neither will people who are older and have retired from the labour force, or people who are younger and are still in school or some form of education. So that's what unemployment is. And our target isn't actually very precise. We aim for unemployment to be low. You may hear people talking about wanting full employment, but that doesn't mean quite what you might think it means, and we'll have a look at that a little bit later on. There are two measures of unemployment that you need to know about. There's the LFS measure or the labour force survey. That's a regular telephone survey. They ring round and they're looking to find out whether people have looked for work recently and whether they can start soon. And if they have looked for work recently and they can start soon, they are counted as unemployed. The other measure is the measure the government tends to use. It's called the claimant count, and it only measures people who are claiming unemployment benefit. Now, those might seem like they're going to be the same thing, but actually the claimant count comes out as a much lower number. There are lots of people who would like a job who can't claim unemployment benefit. For example, depending on why you've left your previous job, you might not be able to claim unemployment benefit for a few weeks. It may be your savings are too high. If you've got large levels of savings, they don't allow you to have any unemployment benefit. It may be you've got a partner who earns too much money, and so even though you don't have a job and you'd like one, you can't claim unemployment benefit. So claimant count tends to come out much lower than the labour force survey. Also, the way different governments in different countries count it is always different. So that makes the labour force survey a much better way of deciding how much unemployment there is in a country and comparing the two. There are a lot of different causes of unemployment, but there are four major ones that you need to understand. The first one is frictional. Frictional unemployment is people who are in between jobs. So they've recently left one job, they'll be getting another job fairly shortly, they're just changing their employer. And that's an odd type of unemployment because that tends to go up in a recession. In a boom rather. Generally, unemployment goes up in a recession and down when the economy is growing strongly. But frictional unemployment goes the other way because people have the confidence to move jobs when they've got some savings and when there's lots of jobs out there and not many people looking to fill the posts. So that's frictional unemployment, which is a slight oddity. Seasonal unemployment are people with jobs like perhaps a ski instructor or harvest workers, things like that. People who have jobs at particular times of year, and they will regularly have work, maybe through the summer, but then when winter comes there isn't as much work to do on the farm, and so they lose that job. It's not as much a problem as some types of unemployment, because they at least have work some of the time, but it can still lead to very irregular work and low incomes. Structural unemployment is a really big concern for governments. This is unemployment because some kind of skills mismatch. So the skills that the unemployed person has don't match the skills that the market wants anymore. An example might be to do with the secondary tertiary shift, the UK's shift from mainly manufacturing stuff to mainly getting involved in services. So for example, you could be an expert shipbuilder, but we don't do much shipbuilding in the UK anymore, so you're unemployed. It's not because you don't have skills or because you don't want work, it's because you've got the wrong skills for the current economic climate. And that's a real problem for the economy because it's hard to get rid of. It takes a lot of retraining, and because lots of the industries that used to exist were really squeezed into particular areas, so shipbuilding around areas of the Clyde in Scotland, mining around areas of the northeast, for example, it can be that it's affected whole communities. And so, because the mine has closed down, very few people have an income. That means the local shop closes down. So even though the shopkeeper didn't work in the mine, they're now without a job as well. So that can be a real problem. The final one that you need to know about is cyclical unemployment. And that's been a particular problem recently because it's to do with the economic cycle. So when the economy is growing really strongly, then we need lots of people working. But as the economy starts to tail off and growth starts to decline, then people lose their jobs. This is to do with a lack of demand, which is why you might hear it called demand-deficient unemployment. So 4 major types of unemployment to know about. Frictional, between jobs. Seasonal, because your job only exists at certain times of the year. Structural, because the skills you have are not the ones that the economy needs anymore. Or cyclical, because there's a lack of demand in the economy. Now that brings us back to the target we were talking about earlier. Some people talk about wanting full employment. Well, they don't actually mean everyone in the economy employed. That would be really difficult because it would mean that no firm could expand because we had no more workers to go out and work. And we'd probably get really high inflation as wages went up and up and up and up because of the shortage of workers. By full employment, what we mean is the number of job vacancies is the same as the number of people looking for jobs. So probably that means that we have frictional unemployment and what we sometimes call voluntary unemployment, people who, they quite want a job, but they're not prepared to take one in the current labour market. So we'd suggest they're probably not willing to work as the economy is at the moment, maybe because they have big savings or something like that. So full employment doesn't actually mean no one unemployed. It means only frictional and voluntary unemployment, only frictional unemployment and people who don't want a job at the current wage rate. There are some major problems with unemployment, and we can split them up. So you have the individual costs of unemployment. Long-term unemployment can put a great strain on people. So it can lead to stress and money worries and health problems and family breakdown. That's not to say that unemployment necessarily causes those things directly, but all those things can be made worse by unemployment for the individual. For the economy as a whole, and the government in particular, it means that they're not making things that the economy can use. So we've got spare capacity in the economy that we could have been using to make things. They could have been paying income tax that would help the government provide services. They could have not been claiming unemployment benefit, which would reduce the government's costs. But because people are unemployed, they reduce the tax they pay and increase the cost to the government, and that can be a problem. Finally, there's the impact on businesses. Generally, businesses aren't too concerned about unemployment directly because the more unemployment there is, the more competition there is for each job, the easier it is to find workers, and the lower they can push down wages. But that doesn't mean that businesses don't mind at all. One of the big problems is what we call skill fade. So you become unemployed because your skills aren't needed perhaps, and then the skills you have fade further because you're not using them, and so then it's even harder to get a job, and then it's harder to get one the next time. And that's not good for individuals because it makes it harder to get employed again, and it's not good for firms because it means they're more likely to have to retrain their workers, which is a cost before they start being usefully productive for the firm.